So again, welcome to the March St. Patrick's Day meeting of the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on People with Disabilities. We've gone through the roll call and introductions. The adoption of the agenda. Do we still not have a quorum?
This is Mandy. I'm here. I finally was able to get in. Sorry.
Okay.
Does that help?
I think it does.
Yes. Sorry,
Okay.
I was trying to count.
Okay. So we are at the approval of the agenda. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Approve the agenda.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Harvey seconds.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Is there any objections to moving by consensus? Hearing none, the agenda is adopted. We have November minutes up first. So you received the November minutes in your packet. Is there a motion to adopt the November minutes?
I move to adopt the minutes.
Somebody want a second?
Joan seconds.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any corrections, deletions, additions? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. And next we have February minutes. Those are also in your packet. Entertain a motion to approve those.
I move to approve the February minutes.
Okay, thanks, Donna. Is there a second?
This is Joan. I'll second.
Phil seconds.
Oh, okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any questions, deletions, additions? Hearing none, I'm going to go to the consensus. Is there any objection to adopting by consensus? Hearing none, the motion is carried, approved. One quick comment, though, I'd like to just add regarding the minutes. I appreciate that it's a challenge to manage the meeting and take minutes at the same time. I think they're pretty sparse, and I don't think that we need to have every minuscule part of our conversations identified, but I think we need a little bit more just in the summary of the discussions we've had. They just seem to be really sparse to me. So I just like to make that comment, and then let's just take that into consideration as we move forward.
Will do.
Okay.
This is Mandy. I also wanted to say that the difference between November, where there was a lot of discussion, and then February is you'll notice that there was an action item listed on February's minutes. I think we all need to do a better job of outlining when we want action to be done on a topic and to be explicit when we want that included in the minutes during our conversations. I think that will help staff do that.
Good point, Mandy. And to that, can I recommend that we include a place in our agenda for action items to review from the previous month's minutes, and those will need to move forward until they're completed. That will help keep us on task. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
And Nick, you make sense to you?
This
You're the
is
most
Javier,
important.
yes.
Yep,
Okay.
I was typing that.
Okay, all right. Let me see.
Mr. Chair, it's Joan.
Yes, Joan.
Just a quick comment, since I probably have the longest longevity of being on the committee here. Regarding minutes are so vitally important because they provide historic information, and as well as Mandy was saying, action items. So we really need to keep our minutes up to date and accurate. And so I'm just kind of putting a bug in Nick to make it a higher priority to really working on these, because when we're long gone, the committee is going to be still here. But this is needed just for, like I said, historic purposes and for moving our agenda through as well. So it's minutes are vital for all committee work.
Thank you, Joan. All the more important for
Sure.
adding a little more meat.
Mandy has her hand raised.
Okay, Mandy?
Yeah, just want to make sure that worked, number one. And number two, this is Mandy. We all know that staff has been very busy, and the prioritization of everything we're doing has to be in context. I thought that these meetings, now that they were virtual, were being recorded so that we might be able to go back and review some of the comments so that we could expand on some of these minutes once we're able to do so, or maybe when there's an intern available to do so, or a volunteer to be able to do so. I know what I do in the meetings when there's something of meat. Sometimes I'll be asked to send that information directly to Nick via email, so he has it. So I'm just wondering if there's other tools while we're using this system to make it more accessible and inclusive, and to be able to add some of that back in later. So in order to do that, if there were adjustments or amendments made, they would have to come back to the committee for adoption. But I think that would be appropriate if there becomes the capacity to do so. So I'll end there. Thanks.
Yeah, and this is Ken. Nick, can you address the record, the recording? Are we keeping those, and are those public record?
Yes, the recordings are public record.
Okay. So are they housed in the same place that our minutes are?
They're housed on our city's YouTube channel. That's where the clerk's office has directed boards and
I have a
commissions
question.
recordings. Someone has a question.
Okay.
Javier.
This is Javier.
And Javier,
So
really
are you
quick,
able to watch? Oh,
this is Nick. Javier, I would like to have your question, but I do want to just plug in there once again that our first presenter is on a very tight time crunch, and I really want to make sure that we have time for them to present.
okay, that's fine.
And we could have this conversation. I'd be happy to have this conversation maybe towards the tail end of the meeting, when after our guest is able to present and have their item done before they have to leave at 5:30.
Javier says fine. That sounds good.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you all. Joseph, you're up then.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Thanks to the committee for having me today. Again, my name is Joe Bernard. I work in CPED here at the city, and my role is as planning project manager. I have some slides. Would that be useful to share on the screen, or should I just hold off and go through my notes here?
Joe, since we have to spotlight the interpreter, if possible, if you could just verbalize, but your slides that you sent out were shared with everyone.
Yep,
Great.
we have those. So if you can just verbalize them, that would be appreciated.
Wonderful.
This is Harvey. I agree.
All right. So what we're doing here is myself and my colleagues, we're making the rounds with various city advisory committees to share some changes that we're proposing to our parking, loading, and travel demand management regulations that are found in our zoning code. The intent of the work is that any changes we make to this zoning ordinance is to make it easier to achieve the desired outcomes that were identified in Minneapolis 2040, the city's comprehensive plan, and with other city policy documents that you've likely spent some time working on, like the Transportation Action Plan and the Climate Action Plan. We're hoping that changes to these regulations are going to have a strong positive impact on achieving goals in these plans, like improving housing affordability, addressing climate change, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions while getting people out of their cars when possible and encouraging transit use, things like that. There's specific direction in Minneapolis 2040 that calls for the need to eliminate parking requirements, minimum parking requirements in private development, for us to evaluate maximum parking limits and to adopt new travel demand management strategies in the zoning code. There's a fairly lengthy history of parking reform in our regulations at the city, and I won't read off a list of all the changes that have happened in the last 20 years, but a message I want to share with you is that incremental change has occurred over the years to the point where we already have a fair number of geographies where we don't have parking requirements in the city today. This project is just the next incremental step in making it so that our parking regulations are not as strict on development. So why are we proposing these changes? First is that the cost of producing parking is always paid for by residential owners and renters, whether they use it or not. This has shown to result in inflated housing costs, and particularly for lower income households. Providing an overabundance of parking also incentivizes automobile use at the expense of more efficient and environmentally friendly forms of transportation. So this results in greater demands being placed on our roadways and increases greenhouse gas emissions. This is kind of a sort of the theory of if you build it, people will use it. There's also a concern that dedicating large portions of land to inactive uses such as parking makes it difficult for people to get what they need, their daily goods, in a small geographic footprint. So it makes it harder for businesses to locate in the city, and it makes it harder for people to get their goods and services all in one place. There's also a concern about making sure that we have urban design best practices that encourage walking, bicycling, and transit use. Some smaller reasons why we're pursuing these changes, but still worth mentioning, is that some of this can be considered regulatory relief, makes it easier for businesses to locate in the city. And also, we can dedicate staff time previously used to enforce our parking regulations and spend that staff time on regulations that address climate change, for example. Okay, so the specific changes that we're proposing are, first, the easiest one to understand is that minimum parking requirements are proposed for elimination citywide. That means that uses will no longer be required to provide parking. That doesn't mean that developers will not supply parking. We have experience with that already in the city, where there are locations that don't require parking, but developers still are doing it. We're also proposing to move forward with a system to change some of our maximum parking limits. Most of those changes are pretty incremental and are pretty close to the existing limits that we have in the zoning code. We are proposing to expand the maximum limit on parking for residential uses beyond downtown. Currently, there is a requirement downtown, and we're going to apply a standard citywide. We're proposing to limit surface parking lots up to 100 spaces. to capture just unique circumstances where a lot of parking is still allowed. With bicycle parking, there will be modest increases in those requirements citywide, and larger developments, excuse me, will have much higher requirements for bike parking. So think large office developments that happen downtown will have much higher requirements than today. Finally, our loading ordinance changes will be pretty minimal. So uses throughout the city, depending upon how many deliveries they get, sometimes need a loading dock. And we're doing some minimal changes to those requirements in the zoning code. Next, we're anticipating that we're going to require electric vehicle charging for some parking spaces moving forward. Again, part of that desire to encourage forms of transportation that help us reduce our impact on the environment. And I think maybe the largest or most significant change that we're proposing to our ordinances is in our travel demand management process. I might use the acronym TDM as I'm describing things. That's what that stands for, travel demand management. I'm going to generalize a little bit, but what our TDM process has done in the past is to mitigate the negative effects of development on our transportation system. What we want to do moving forward is to shape development on the front end so those negative transportation impacts never materialize. And how we're going to do that is we want to first explicitly state that goal of achieving greenhouse gas emission reductions and focus less on traffic in our travel demand management process. We want to focus requirements through this process on physical improvements to development. And I'll get into what that means here in my next remarks in a moment. We're also proposing, since we are eliminating parking requirements, we're going to require that more developments go through our travel demand management process. And what that will look like is that most projects over 50 dwelling units or larger than 25,000 square feet will be required to provide certain standards in their development, depending upon the size of their development and the use of their development. The strategies that we have proposed include, and I'm not going to go through all of them here, but I'll highlight a few. If a development provides 0 vehicle parking, they will get 6 points in our point system for the travel demand management process. That will satisfy the requirement, as an example, for most smaller projects, which will be required. Smaller projects will be required to provide 4 or 6 points from our TDM strategies. Other examples would be if you provide a shared vehicle in your development, you could get 2 points. If you participate in a maintenance agreement or post real-time transit info on your property, that would get you a point. And we're also wanting to strongly encourage transit passes as a way to comply with our travel demand management process. So that would get you 6 points. I think I'll leave it at that for now and not get into too many more details. I want to make sure I'm here for part of your discussion. But I will describe here what our timeline is moving forward. We went to the Planning Commission Committee of the Whole last week to give them an overview of our ideas. There is a public hearing scheduled in front of the Planning Commission on April 12th, where they will consider our draft ordinance language. And then the City Council will consider this item at their Business Inspections, Housing and Zoning Committee on May 4th, and the City Council on May 14th. So there's still plenty of time to get thoughts, ideas, comments into us as staff before we finalize our recommendations, and of course, time to get comments in front of our appointed and elected officials as well. I think I'll pause and ask the chair if there's questions, and I'm here to support your discussion as needed.
All right, thank you, Joe. And before I release
Harvey,
the crowd,
here I have a few questions.
Hang on. Before I release the crowd to bombard you with their concerns and issues and questions, I want to ask you a very simple question that I did not see identified in the proposal that you presented to us prior to the meeting or here in your discussion. But there are a couple things that have a major concern for us. What was your involvement in including the needs of people with disabilities in parking? You know, currently right now, disability parking is required only when there is parking that's offered. If there's no parking offered, which is your removal of minimals, there's no parking for people with disabilities. So what strategies have you used, or what have you done to include people with disabilities in this project?
I think that's part of why I'm here, is to get your ideas on that issue. We, I think, are really interested in knowing how we can improve conditions for folks that aren't using a vehicle. We know that there will always be people that need to use cars, and that's not the focus of this amendment. The condition you describe is accurate, that we already have a number of places in the city where there's no parking required. And if a development does not supply parking, they are not required by the building code to supply accessible parking. That situation is not changing. The building code requirements are not changing. But you're correct that we're expanding the areas where no parking would be required. As just some context as far as how frequent does that occur, we've had 2 residential developments in the last 10 years where there was no resident parking provided, and they did still provide some visitor parking, and so accessible parking. That isn't to say that this concern is something we're brushing aside, but we certainly want to hear from the committee on ways that we can address this. So I'm all ears.
Okay, and was that Harvey who had questions?
It will
yes.
be Harvey up, and
Harvey.
then Mandy afterwards.
Okay.
So I didn't hear anything about the ADA or any of those issues related to the parking spaces. And where are the handicap parking spaces and disability spaces for the vocational? Oh, vertical or horizontal.
Vertical.
For vertical or horizontal parking when you pull up into those parking spots. So can you explain a little bit about that and what the long-term impacts and improvements will be for that parking? One moment before you explain. Javier, can you see Harvey's question? Okay, perfect. Oh, no, you can't. Okay, one moment while I interpret Harvey's question. Okay, go ahead, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no changes to the way the building code deals with ADA required spaces. Our standards for the size of spaces will remain the same. I think maybe I could ask for some clarification around what is meant by vertical.
This is Nick. I think I could just quickly do some of that clarification to Harvey. My understanding is Joe is coming to present about a proposed ordinance change in terms of if a development is submitting plans for, and this is residential, am I correct, Joe, or just development in general?
In general.
In general, that they have the option to either include parking facilities, and if they do, they are bound by all the codes, state and federal. Nothing's changed there, and that includes clearance, and we would do our usual review of that. But the proposed changes is if the facility or the development is not including parking. I think the question from CPAD or Joe here is, if it's not included, what are ways that the city could work, or some ideas that the city could incorporate to make sure that people with disabilities are served or included in this new strategy? Am I characterizing that correctly, Joe?
Yes, thank you, Nick.
Yep.
Yeah, so, and this is Ken, and I want to just further clarify so that it's really clear and Harvey, you understand what the proposal is, and forgive me if I shortchange it in any way, but basically what the proposal is that entities that build will no longer be required to provide parking. In fact, they're incentivized not to provide it because they get a higher score if they don't have it. That means that there will be no disability parking. Disability parking is only required when there is parking offered. If there's no parking offered, then there will be no disability parking. And that is greatly going to affect the community of people with disabilities that drive and need to drive. So that's the dilemma that we're kind of being presented with. That's the proposal. Did I bastardize that too much?
I think that's fair.
Yep. Mandy,
Okay.
I believe
Mandy?
you have your.
Yep, Mandy.
All right. So I know that you are the messenger, but I want to prepare you for what's coming. And I mean that with all due respect. You've engaged us far too late in this process. And you have not engaged the disability community enough in this process. What this is going to result in for you is that I will be making a motion about this specific proposal so that this specific committee, and encouraging others to sign on with us to say no, that this is not appropriate. And you have to come up with a different solution to include parking minimums to ensure that the state and federal statutes for accessible parking are maintained. This is more than just about visitability. Again, that's visitability for the interpreters. I know that's a hard term. This is also about the people who are living in these facilities who may acquire a disability over time, where they may need additional support and access, or people who are trying to gain access to accessible housing. I want to be really clear that this is not a solution that is going to be accepted, and that this could result in risk to the city in liability related to lawsuits. And part of the job of this committee is to call out when there are proposals and changes of ordinance that could include discriminating practices to the disability community that would open up the city to liability. So when I looked at your presentation, I wanted to wait and hear you out. I looked at page 9 that talks about some of the scoring, where only the term accessible is listed twice in your presentation on page 9. And not in a favorable way, I might add that there is no resolution or solution to what you've presented. This is not something that I can support. It is not something that I would encourage my city council member to support, and they're going to be hearing from me. The mayor is going to be hearing from me, and whether or not this committee chooses to accept the motion that is coming from me and write a letter in opposition to this, I'm still going to go talk about it. Whether I can represent this organization or not, this committee, that remains to be seen. But you need to know that if I'm saying this to you now, there will be others. And I want a lot of what you're doing to be successful. And I think there's a lot of potential in what you're doing. But this one piece undermines the current statutes that are available to provide that sense of equality and access to housing, and again, visitability. It also undermines the accessibility of those who are making deliveries and support for people who are living in facilities, whether they are driving or not. It's just wrong. And so I'm going to end there and let other people speak. And I was hoping that Joan would come up after me, because I would expect the state council to have a position on this. And I pray that they do. Thank you.
Joan has her hand raised.
Okay, Joan.
Yep. Hi. I no longer represent the state council on disability, so you'll have to get what they would want to do directly from them. But definitely, I'm just kind of sitting here in awe. My chin is down to the floor. I'm in shock and awe. I mean, I've been on this committee forever, it seems like, and I've never had heard of a project like this coming before the committee where it is really putting people with disabilities. Well, it's not even putting people with disabilities out. We're not even anywhere on the plan whatsoever. We're listening in the round of the world right now in the nation where we're looking at possible voter suppression. Well, I think this ranks right up there with suppressing the disability community if we don't even have access to businesses to be able to live, work, and play in our own city here. So I'm appalled and absolutely will vote against this. And right with you, Mandy. We've got to get this one nailed to the floor because it can't go anywhere. This is just disgusting. Absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, so Nick, is there anybody else's hand up?
I think Harvey, did you have something? Harvey wanted to just say thank you for Mandy and what you said, and the reason for bringing that up too about the parking issues and not being able to see it and have it visibility, and having it be there and accessible, and putting it out in that hearing language in that way for people to understand.
Yes, and so I just want to add one other thing. And Joe, these are maybe some comments that you can take back to your colleagues, but the plan that you describe or that's described to us has desperate treatment to people with disabilities. That in and of itself is discriminatory. So I would echo Mandy's exertion that this policy on its face has legal implications that would put the city in a bad spot. You were right. It doesn't directly affect ADA, but the fact that this policy has not been viewed with an equity lens, as I think all policies within the city should be viewed through, at least through first course to see what's missing here, is completely puts the disability community at a distinct discriminatory advantage. And that alone should be enough to stop the process from going forward. And as Mandy has indicated, unless the minimal is to provide at least, if no public parking, there needs to be disability parking. That might be something in the right direction, but currently I agree this is not a policy that will stand well.
Really quick, Joe, I know that you were trying to respond.
Thank you. So I just want to add a little more information and context that might be helpful. One is that, to make it clear, we already have this condition in many parts of the city where there is no parking requirement. That doesn't make it right or wrong, but I want you to know that when you're making your comments to us and to the city council. Second is that this is the reason why I'm here, is that I very genuinely want to hear your suggestions on how to resolve this problem, in that we have a policy document, Minneapolis 2040, adopted 2 years ago, that included hundreds of public meetings, including coming to this group. And I know it was not well received at that time either. The policy direction is very clear that the city will eliminate parking minimums. So, I appreciate that it was acknowledged that I'm somewhat just the messenger here, but I think that context is important so that when you're giving feedback to us, that we want to act on it, believe me. I'll leave it at that and say I'm ready to hear your suggestions in more detail. I'm sorry that I have another meeting that I have to present at 5:30 this evening. So if I duck out, it's not because I don't want to hear what you have to say. Thank you again for your thoughtful comments.
Mandy is up next, I believe.
Thank you. So this is Mandy again. For the purpose of public meeting notice, I wanted to disclose that I put 2 items into the meeting chat to read aloud. One is a phonetic spelling for the interpreters of visibility. Again, that's VISITABILITY. And then for the minutes that would reference this term, it's the definition that is being used from visitability.org. See, even I'm having trouble saying it now, which is talking about what housing is designed as a way that can be lived in or visited by people, which we give examples of no-step entrances, accessible restrooms, and living quarters. That same information is applied to spaces such as, large congregate settings and apartments. And again, while I mentioned Joan before, while she does no longer work for State Council, I know State Council has taken a position on this in the past during the time that she's served and during the time that she's served on this committee. I know that we discussed this in the 2040 plan. I've been to those public meetings with NCR. I've brought this topic up. I believe it's the responsibility of the commission to continue to voice an opposition to this process unless there can be a minimum requirement of parking and accessible parking available to both residents and those who are visiting. And that is the clear point, that removing the minimums undermines the current law for accessibility in place. And Ken is really clear about this disparate treatment that results in discrimination. There will be lawsuits. We can't in good conscience let you continue without bringing that up and bringing that to the attention of the current administration. Whether we brought it up before or not makes no difference. I'm hoping that there will be a change of heart or common sense or looking at new case law to tell you that this is not a good idea and that something has to change. And so even a minimum of a specific number of stalls that could be used as a reasonable accommodation can trigger this. So I do encourage you to work with the State Council on Disability. I do encourage you to work with the regional ADA centers and the United States Access Board, and to look at the case law. We're going to encourage the city attorneys to do the same before we get into a situation where something like this is proposed, voted on, and potentially implemented, where it's going to have to be challenged and resolved in courts. We don't want that to happen. I think that there can be a compromise, but without working with us on this, or working with some reputable disability community for engagement and just talking to other lawyers, I don't think that's going to happen. So it takes more than just us here and more than coming to the commission. We're not going to approve this. That was never probably in question, but I think how we help you navigate sharing this information back to the decision makers is what you're hoping for today. And that I hope that this feedback tells you that a change needs to be made. So since you have to leave soon, what written language other than a direct letter of opposition with key points is going to help you? What other information can we provide?
Mandy, this is Nick, and thank you for that. Joe, I know you have a limited time, so how about, if you don't mind, Mandy, let's rephrase it this way. I know Joe, you outlined dates for public comment. I think there's an opportunity here to maybe work perhaps a little bit closer directly with you all and CPED to, let's say, check where, to Mandy's point, there could be a compromise within the changes. So perhaps that's something we could explore and include a smaller group of folks. Is that something that's doable?
It may be doable. I don't think it's very realistic with the timeline laid out. And as Mandy indicated, I think the biggest problem is coming to us too late in the process. And one other legal piece, and you can have the city attorney review this, but I believe it's illegal for a municipality to create a policy that results in disparate treatment of protected class citizens. And I think a good argument could be made that that's exactly what this does.
This is Mandy, real quick. I think what we need to do as an action item would be to engage the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and the AG's office, along with the State Council on Disability directly, to get a consultant. And maybe there could be, maybe we're asking the wrong question, and I agree with Nick. Maybe we just say we're requesting a meeting or a case review on this as a preemptive action prior to the cycle of this being presented, which I was noting was the public hearing on April 12th. There's got to be at least a call with city government and these entities before, so they can figure out what they're going to present on April 12th, May 4th, and May 14th. And if something goes into effect on May 22nd, please, there's going to be lawsuits.
Anyone else? Okay. Anything else you need from us, Joe?
No, thank you for your time. I am happy to have additional conversation as time allows. Like, I understand that this is a quick turnaround, but I can talk with Nick about what that looks like if we're to talk some more. Again, you all have my contact information, or Nick can share it with you. Please send any ideas you have on how to improve this ordinance to me, and I'll work with my colleagues to incorporate it into our ordinance.
All right, thank you, Joe. Let me see. So
Ken, this is Mandy. I apologize. Marina was knocking at the door and says hi to everybody. Is this now the appropriate point in time to make a motion for action?
Sure.
Okay. Does anyone else want to take a stab at it before I do?
And I think you're in a, you're probably the best one to kind of draft out some language. I hope it does include reaching out to the Attorney General's office and State Council on Disability and the Disability Law Center.
Sure. Okay, so I think at this point, my motion would be based on the current presentation provided in today's meeting, that the motion would be to have MACAPOD formally oppose the ordinance change as written. And that's part one of the motion. And then the connected part of that motion, sort of part two, would be directing NCR to engage with legal consult on the potential, it's not even potential,
Right.
let's just be honest, to engage on the perceived discriminatory effect this ordinance would have on the disability community. And that legal consult would include, but wouldn't be limited to, the following entities: Minnesota Attorney General's Office, Minnesota Disability Law Center, State Council on Disability, Minnesota Department of Human Rights, and federally HUD would need to be included, I would assume, as well. Their disability liaison. Did I miss anyone, Ken? It's a friendly amendment.
Yeah, no, I think those are the majors.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot other federal partners. Shoot. And then our regional ADA center. And they might consult with the access board, because for transportation issues and access issues, it may go to the access board or DOT, depending.
Yeah.
I mean, from an ordinance, they might not step in. I think it might just be done best at the regional. So again, motion in two parts. Thankfully, this is being recorded so that we can get the language. So language number one, that based on the current presentation to MACAPOD today, that MACAPOD opposes the ordinance as written. And that part two is that MACAPOD directs NCR to engage the city attorney on consulting with state and federal partners and disability resources to, what did I say? I said evaluate the perceived disparate treatment and discrimination of people with disabilities by this ordinance. Someone put me out of my misery in second.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? You know, the only thing I would add is I would be okay with an adjective to describing how much we reject this. And it was in your first sentence, oppose, how much we oppose, adamantly oppose, strongly oppose. It doesn't have to be there, but that's how strongly I feel about it.
So I would definitely take that as a friendly amendment. Do you also believe that part of the motion should include a letter to the Planning Commission and City Council, or are we not there yet? Is that something? The Planning Commission is meeting in April before our next meeting, so maybe that's an order in the motion. And then at the April meeting, we would discuss if things hadn't changed or if there are no updates to write a letter to the City Council for their May meeting.
I would be good with that. I think that's a good idea. And I think it's really behooves all of us to reach out to our own council members to give them a heads up.
Okay, so Nick, what I was hearing then is there's a part 3 to the motion that's on the floor, which is that for Macapod to write a letter of opposition and direct it to the Planning Commission in time for their April meeting. And that would be distributed to all Macapod membership and be part of the minutes for the April meeting, which will be held after the Planning Commission meets. And then the other part was we're tabling the possibility of a letter to City Council to our April meeting. So that would be a potential action item for the April meeting. Is that correct, Ken?
Yeah, it sounds good to me. Okay, any other discussion?
Harvey has a comment.
Okay, Harvey.
To write that letter, I would encourage to have it sent out this week.
Harvey, I know I don't have time to do it this week. I mean, it's really going to be, that's a lot to ask. I mean, Ken, are you going to be able to help participate in the drafting?
I have limited availability the rest of this week.
Yeah, I'm on litigation deadline.
Harvey, is it okay if we just if we make it as soon as possible?
Harvey here. Yeah, that should be fine. What about Joan? Do you have any availability?
Yeah, I've got some time.
Perfect. Thank you, Joan.
And this is Mandy. I would err on the wisdom of Joan in the language of a letter based on her experience and knowledge. So I probably wouldn't be the person to do that first draft.
Yeah, I'm also happy looking at it and editing, but the first draft is probably not something I have availability for. But to whoever does create the first draft, I think it's really important to include the word disparate treatment, because this policy is a policy that clearly creates as its outcome disparate treatment, and that, I believe, is a legal component.
This is Mandy, correct? Disparate treatment and access to housing as well as access to visiting.
Yes.
Harvey had a question. Joan, you will be writing the letter this week then, is that correct, that you're volunteering to do that?
I'm gonna have to engage both Ken and Mandy on this. So I'll start putting something together, but
this is Nick. Perhaps we should proceed with passing this motion, but let's not try to impose too many deadlines at the moment.
Yeah, well, you know, I agree, Nick, but this is really critically important. And so I know there's lots of stuff going on, but this is what we're here for, and this is really important. So any last chance for comment or questions? Okay, hearing none, let's take a roll call vote. All those in favor of the motion?
Oh, I have a question here first.
Oh, go ahead, Donna.
I'm thinking because this is so important, we should do a roll vote.
That's what we're doing.
No, I mean name by name.
That's what we're doing.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to have to say aye. Okay.
Oh, no. This is a roll call vote.
Okay.
You want to call the roll, Nick?
Yes. I'm gonna go down my list. Donna.
Aye.
Mandy.
Aye.
Phil.
Aye.
Joan.
Aye.
Harvey.
Aye.
Ken.
Aye.
And Javier.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, and let it be reflected it was unanimous. All right, next up, 508 compliance with the vaccination hub. And who's doing this one?
It'll be me on the next two items.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, this is Nick. So I'll do a little bit of a history here. During February's Disability Committee meeting, we had Heather Gillick from the Health Department come and present on the city's vaccination efforts. Heather provided a presentation in terms of, at that time, it has changed now, the vaccines available, and then a synopsis of federal, state, and local efforts in kind of the timeline of where folks fall along for vaccination. As part of that presentation, Heather gave information on a effort that the health department is creating online called the city's vaccination hub. And as part of that conversation, I believe it was a request by the committee to do a section 508 or not section a 508 check, compliance check. So since that time, Heather was very diligent in engaging with the city's IT department, as well as other folks that are in charge of the construct of the vaccination hub and the website front. We recently had a sit down with IT and members of health in terms of going through that. And my apologies, I did, after the meeting, I did forward them what that checklist was or is, and they had that on hand. So as part of that conversation, this is what I learned as well. So, and this is a little background. The city has a new website platform. And in that effort, and in the work with this committee, a lot of what that platform was selected for was to have those accessibility components and structures in place to meet 508 and WCAG. So the vaccination hub, that platform is not part of this platform. So that website construct has not gone through that particular area. It went through a different platform, and I know it included ARC GIS as part of it. So in our conversation, what I explained to IT is the components that they need to have in place is that structural component in terms of heading, body text that follows that, linking that alternative text to imagery, how the colors play out, and things like that. So they have that on hand, and we are fortunate that they understand it because they have worked on the new website and has had experience in that. So they are going through and doing that formal check with their own systems. And it was a request, or they asked if the committee is able to go through and do kind of a user check as well. And the way that we were thinking about it is that as they are doing the checks with the tools they have on hand, they would like to have a user check to make sure that the features are connecting with each other and navigation makes sense. As it stands right now on the vaccination hub, it's primarily information around the vaccines that are available, vaccination efforts at a state and local level, and then information that will soon be available in different languages. And that's something that we're working with them from NCR on as well. Right now, there are no interactive maps or imagery. So that is something that I want to state as well. At a later date, they may include that as part of their feature in terms of an interactive map as more vaccination clinics are available. Try to get ahead of that as well in terms of if they are providing that available via ArcGIS, they have to make sure that information is readily available via a downloadable format or something in terms of based off of if you live in this ward, here are available vaccination clinics and subsequent contact information and so on. So that was presented to them, and they are very well. That was received very well by them as well. So that is where we are currently on this particular front.
Okay, so Nick,
Yep.
if we wait any longer, the vaccines are going to be over. I mean, this is moving pretty quickly, and there's another thing I want to point out, that I am adamantly opposed to volunteers from the disability community to do user testing. If user testing is needed, then the city needs to pay an agency or a company to do that. It's not appropriate for volunteers to do that without being paid as a professional who does that work.
I will take that note down and bring it back to the health department.
Yeah, you know, that's a tactic the state likes to use quite a bit, and we're collectively trying to put a stop to that. That's just not appropriate, and it puts too much responsibility on individuals, and that should be a part of the process.
I wholeheartedly understand and agree. We do that for a lot of other parts of the city's work, so it only makes sense that we do it in this front as well.
Right.
Yep.
And
I was
anybody
sent
else?
all the way to Mall of America for my shot.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm sorry, were you going to finish, Ken?
Yeah, no, I was just asking if anybody else had questions or comments.
There are a few hands up, and I think they were from the previous one, but I will call out who I see first. Joan, do you have a comment or question?
No, that's okay.
Then Mandy, do you have a comment or question?
I do. So first off, Ken handled what I was going to say very eloquently, because too often we've even offered, but it's just not something that we should be offering anymore. Do we need to have a motion about that? That anytime there's a request for compliance checks, that it is recommended, or that the position of Macapod is that this needs to be a paid function and included in part of their budgeting process for compliance with their vendor as part of that procurement?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Then we're on record and we don't have to revisit this every time.
Yep, it's nothing about Heather, but I mean, that might be something that's really important to have standing. And I thought that NCR had some standing language when it came to recommendations on RFPs on to include accessible components in their procurement and their contracts. I know I've supplied the information from PEAT, P-E-A-T, on this before, and other organizations that talk about this. So I know for the sake of time, this might not be the best way to do it, but why don't, maybe as an action item, we follow up to see if NCR or the city has any documented position on this, and if not, then I would recommend at the April meeting that it's placed on the agenda for Macapod to take a position, recommend content that could be adopted by the city enterprise to ensure that this is included as part of their procurement cycle. They've got to make sure it's accessible, and they got to make sure that it's tested. And so whether their vendor does it or the city does it, someone's got to pay for it.
Yep.
So that last part, again, I agree. Let me do some homework on that to check. It's been a while since I've done our procurement work. I believe there's something of the sorts, at least language on, inclusion and accessibility. I think the finer detail, Mandy, is around the testing component, making sure there's resources dedicated to that. That part I'm very unclear of, and I'm not able to comment on right now.
Right. I think for the action item for next month, that would be a follow-up, is, one, ensuring that accessible design and testing is included as part of that procurement process. and in that budgeting process. So whether it's an internal project that the city's going to have to pay for that, or if it's through an external vendor, that's included in that bid. And so I think it's premature to sort of make a motion for today without that information. But if you could bring some of that information back, I bet we could draft language.
No problem. So I just want to make sure I have this clear very well. Sorry, I'm trying to take notes and do a few things. At least on the vaccination hub, I want to get back to that real quick. The committee's recommendation is we need to pay for user testing. Agreed. That's pretty straightforward. The future motion.
The city needs to, or they need to contract with the vendor who made the site if it was external to do that.
Yep.
And they need a commitment to maintain it each time they add a feature.
That part is good.
Yeah, and I think this actually may point to a bigger issue. So how is it that the Minneapolis Department of Health could contract with an outside vendor for some IT work without involving the IT department at the city of Minneapolis that might be a better gatekeeper for compliance?
That is a question that I would have to take back.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that looks at the systemic issue. So if that could be discovered, then we might be able to recommend how that could be avoided. I mean, if any department could vendor out or contract out whenever they wanted to without any type of gatekeeper, that could create a lot of problems moving forward.
Duly noted.
Any other comments?
I believe Javier.
Yep.
One thing I want to talk about the screens, about we need to know about deaf friendly and deaf blind screens. So if they have an interpreter brought in for something, or person to get their vaccine, even though they could be only there for a half an hour, but it's really important to first explain to them, explain about the vaccine, exactly what it's used for. You need an interpreter, because with masks, really, we can't understand, especially if something happens. I know there's masks, you can't have them because they're not approved to have certain kinds of masks. You can't really have the clear ones because they're not approved. Is that what we're talking about? I think it's important that if there's a request to have an interpreter available for the clinic or the center for a deaf blind person to come in.
And I don't know that we've actually talked about that in terms of actual logistics at vaccination sites that the city is promoting.
No, we did not get to that part of the conversation last time.
So yeah. Maybe this can be addressed by us ensuring that on any communication regarding vaccination information, vaccination sites, the process, whatever it involves, there needs to be ADA language that educates people as to the process that is needed if they need assistive or reasonable accommodations at the facility when they're signing up. So I think that might take care of this concern, so that if somebody that's deafblind, for example, wants to sign up for a vaccination at a site, they need to get information about how they apply or how they ask for a reasonable accommodation at the site.
This is Harvey. For your information, There was one place that had announced for deaf blind, and this had happened last Saturday. What about in future opportunities? We may not know.
So Harvey, do you mean that there's a particular place and time in which deaf and deafblind
Yes.
citizens might go? That
Yes.
could we, Nick, raise that to the Department of Health as a potential solution?
Yes, I wrote down the notes, and that's something that I will have to bring back to our health department to get information on. And then if Harvey, if you could email regarding what you came across last weekend, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, and that's
okay,
a great,
we'll do.
That's a great suggestion, Harvey. I really like that. And I know there's probably they'll need to figure out some logistical issues, because I know right now everything's based on who meets the criteria that's currently established for receiving vaccinations. But a block of time, for example, at the Minneapolis Convention Center, that's specifically set aside for a particular community like deaf and deafblind, and then for the city to have or the county to have the resources there to handle it all at one time, might be a really good approach to handling this kind of a need within the community.
And this is Harvey. This was at Oxford Community Center
Oxford?
in St. Paul. Yes, Oxford Community Center in St. Paul.
Okay.
Just FYI.
So this is Mandy. I have a slightly different way of approaching this for an action item, which is to encourage, by communicating directly with Heather, for the city of Minneapolis to partner with the deaf and deafblind community to host a specific event or targeted hours at the convention center with resources and services for the deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind community. So we can say as Macapod, we know that there is a need in the city.
Right.
And we want them to partner and advertise with the organizations to make sure that there would be enough technology for video interpretation or live interpretation, especially with the deafblind community, to do that. So I think that's an actual recommendation that we can make directly to Minneapolis Department of Health. And then they can also decide what partners that they want to engage with. Like we can recommend that they work with MyThor, with the state as the disability vaccination coordinator, who's been connecting individuals and organizations in the disability community, including Minneapolis, to help get vaccines. We can advertise in places like Vaccines for the Vulnerable. So if something comes up after we make this recommendation, it'd be great for Heather to send it out to Macapod so we can post it to our networks as well. And all in there. Right.
And one of the other communities that that they might do some outreach to is the deafblind DBA, Deafblind Services. I can't remember the acronym.
What is it?
Hard to
I
say.
don't remember exactly either.
Deafblind Association.
Yes,
DSM?
Deafblind Association. Yep, DBA. Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry. I go between muting, typing, unmuting. So if it's there's a little bit of pause, that's just why.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Do you have anything else on this?
No, I just want to make sure I'm very clear. I believe I am, but I feel like there was 3 potentials, kind of more like 2.5 actions. One is again that the health department either needs to check back with the vendor or pay for user testing, accessibility user testing The second one, which is a little bit outside this realm in terms of City of Minneapolis, particularly the health department, I'm gonna slow down, to partner with deafblind organizations and services to do two things. One, provide outreach for when vaccinations are available. Two, accommodations on site. And a potential idea as a subsequent part of that action is that as more vaccinations are readily available, or as part of the more intended outreach or targeted vaccination, if there could be a particular block of time either at the convention center or any of the other vaccination sites to be blocked out for deaf-blind folks to come in and be vaccinated. Those are the two. And then the other potential half motion that would be in April is to check the procurement process, correct?
And this is Harvey.
Yes.
And I just wanted to let you know too that there's several vaccination areas that use VRI already, as like the Courage Center uses that already. They have, for vaccinations, they provide interpreters through VRI, which is remotely.
I'm going to just direct this particular action to city vaccination efforts. And that's where we have most control over.
Yep.
Great.
But you know, the city vaccination logistics people might be able to easily coordinate with a community center or a particular site within the city. So, you know, I think all of the above is a good approach. So
sure. And I think the last one is not to be for today, but at a later date, is to check back with on our procurement process to make sure that language around accessibility inclusion requirements is in the process or contracting process, as well as testing, user testing as well.
right.
Did I capture that accurately?
Yeah, I think that's good. And you know, just so that you know, that is a particular that's a particular, I'll call it a blind spot. I was trying to think of another term for it, but that's a particular blind spot in policy when procurement is being made. This is something that's often missed in policy, is ensuring who has the responsibility to ensure accessibility. You know, and I'll give you an example from the state. We do have in our contract language that the deliverable has to be accessible, but then the question is, and that got omitted from the policy, is who has the responsibility to ensure the accessibility, and that often includes who has to pay for that if it wasn't included in the first deliverable. So just learn from those examples that those are areas that often get missed in policy, but are really important to have.
Mandy, you have your hand
Yep.
raised.
So this is Mandy. I'm so impressed how Nick is multitasking right now, because I was just sending some links to Nick and I accidentally sent it to everyone. So you now all have the examples about accessible procurement. So excuse me for nerding out with Nick. So there's that email. I also wanted to say that, you know, if we're referring this to vaccine logistics, let's also say that we would love to hear back from them if they have an event that's targeted to the disability community, especially to the deafblind community, so that we can help promote it. I think that's the missing piece there.
Great. You okay, Nick?
Yep, I'm trying to grow a third hand so I could type on this and click around. Fun fact, I'm not sitting at my desk because it's been hurting my eyes and my back at the same time. So I'm kind of just on my one laptop versus multiple screens at the moment.
Blue light glasses are really good.
It's been hurting
For
my
those
ears
who can
too.
see.
Yeah. Okay, so can
We're
we move on?
Yes, and I really wanted to make sure that I have time on this particular front as well. So if everyone's comfortable, I would like to switch over to just kind of highlighting the city's preparation for the current Derek Chauvin trial.
Yep.
Perfect. So yesterday I also sent out kind of a one pager with links and information to where folks could get this same information and frequent updates as well. And so I'm gonna start it here where I'm gonna give a very universal or universe of approach in terms of painting what's happening. And then we could kind of, I know that there's a set of questions. So let me do the explanation first, and then I'd be happy to take questions, okay? So the city right now, not the city, but right now that's occurring that happened last week or so on March 8th is the start of the Derek Chauvin trial, who is being charged with the killing of George Floyd. So currently there is jury selection, and that is happening with the state and the courts. So a lot of that, any updates regarding that could be found on the Minnesota courts website. And they will post frequent updates to that. So what the city has done in preparation is a few different efforts. One is called Operation Safety Net. And Operation Safety Net is a multi-jurisdiction effort, not only with the city public safety, but with state and local public safety PIOs, or public information officers, and other bodies of work in making sure that they create a public safety plan and address any concerns around the trial and preparations for the trial. In that, the city has put together what's called a joint information system. And this is similar to what we have created for COVID efforts, the elections, as well as the Super Bowl and Final Four when they were here a few years ago. So the Joint Information System is a again multi-jurisdiction effort with the city of Minneapolis, Hennepin County, and different departments at the state level, and making sure that we are able to one, absorb questions, concerns, issues from the community around the trial and trial preparation, as well as provide relevant information in regards to any types of service updates or alterations that are happening around the trial. So a good example of that right now is around Government Center, where jury selection is taking place. There are physical barricades around that particular area, as well as City Hall. In doing that, transit routes have been changed in that particular area for folks that are typically accessing either the light rail or the bus from the 6th Street, 4th Street, 5th Street area. So how we share that information is on a few different areas. There are a few different communication strategies. Is we have our city newsletter that's released on Wednesday and Friday. The city is doing weekly press conferences now on Thursday mornings at 10:30. That will be available via local news station, and then the city also streams it via our social media websites and city channels as well, so Facebook, YouTube. We also provide information in different languages through our cultural radio shows. Those were monthly. Now they are contracted to weekly shows. We have KMOJ at 89.9 FM, La Raza, which is a Spanish-speaking channel, at 95.7. Kali, K-A-L-Y, which is a Somali station, and then WXK, which is Hmong as well. Operation Safety Net. I'm sorry, real quick. Let me switch interpreters. D, I'm going to switch to you right now. Operation Safety Net is doing weekly press conferences as well, and those are on Mondays. around 2 p.m., I believe. So, and then we also are linking to their social media pages that's available via Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and they have their own homepage online. So the city recently started our own trial webpage that's linked to a lot of these different areas. And then we are working to have that readily available in different languages, hopefully by the end of the week. So that is a very, very 30,000 foot high level universe view. And I'm happy to answer anything in more detail.
So Nick, first question is,
Mhm.
Are the press conferences all ASL interpreted?
Yes, and I have been hounding communications, and they have been putting up with my frequent communications or messages on making sure that I get all the up-to-date information about where the press conferences are happening. So at first, they were not. We were trying to move to a static, this day, this time, this location. So we have been able to get to that particular cadence within the last week. So Mondays, we also provide ASL interpreters for Operation Safety Net's press conferences. So Mondays at 2, Thursdays at 10:30, and we so far have been able to provide ASL interpreters at every single one, even with changes in schedule and locations. It's been fun.
Any questions for anybody?
Which local channel will it be on?
I have not tuned in via our local channels, but I think at least with Friday's press conference, that was a special event. I saw that one streamed through WCCO, but I could double check. But I don't want to say with certainty, but I would think WCCO and a few of the other local channels like KSTP would usually stream that or capture it.
Anybody else?
Hey, this is Mandy. So I was looking at the one, I guess that was posted 4 or 9 hours ago. Oh, hold on. Gosh. I was looking at it and it started playing. So I'm looking at it on Facebook's version. There isn't any live captioning that's turning on. I do see in the interpreter, the way that they've designed where the camera is, the interpreter in some versions is in front of a flag, which can be distracting. Or there's someone staged behind the interpreter, which can also be distracting when they're moving around. There needs to be like an interpreter zone at these events where it's literally the floor is taped off blue and there isn't anything in the camera shot, so it should be checked. Does that make sense? So talking to comms about making sure that they have the correct placement of the interpreter or interpreters and that there's nothing in the background to obstruct view. That's the only feedback I have. If I can see it, and I can barely see, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I would also have your logistic people double check with the interpreters, because it really is part of the responsibility of the interpreters to ensure that their setting is adequate. Sometimes there's limitations, but between the people that are doing logistics and the interpreters themselves, they should be able to address the issue that Mandy's talking about. I totally agree.
Yep. I've noted that. I have not been present for these press conferences, but we have very great partners in comms or communications that will take this feedback.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
This is Mandy again. If we're not talking about the dissemination of information, I did want to know if this is the time to talk about accessible path of travel and communicating accessible paths of travel that may be required around the space for those who live and work near the space.
Yes, and Mandy, I was foreshadowing this conversation.
You knew I was coming. Okay, I'm going to let
Yep.
you talk.
Yep.
Thanks.
One final note on the dissemination of information. I remember that I noted our website. I just want to note that this is the first iteration in terms of content. I know there are still folks that kind of want to have a little bit more content available around safety and preparations and what to do. So this will be a ongoing work in terms of updates and information as well. Mandy, to your points around the physical site itself. So the notes that I mentioned in terms of how the site is prepared is there is a physical barricade that is encompassing the perimeter of both City Hall and the Hennepin County Government Center. And in that, the barricade does have an accessible path of travel, or at least a temporary path of travel. I'm going to put it that way as well. And I did visit it last Monday. I have not been back, but in the preparations of leading up to this last week, those notes were made in advance based off of our experience last year with the police precinct. So, and thank you, Mandy. That was work with you as well, in terms of making sure that we have this foresight in the planning process, in terms of one, making sure there is a temporary path of travel that's accessible, and two, that there's signage. When I was there, I did not see signage, but that was something that our Public Works Department was working on. I have not had a chance to check back with Public Works on that particular front. Mandy? Your hand's
Okay,
raised.
so
okay.
sorry. The reason why I mentioned this is Mandy, is that I know that there's an individual who has sent requests to the city and a possible lawsuit pending, which I believe would be towards Hennepin County because of the location, not the city necessarily, but the city might be a party, based on lack of communication of accessible path of travel. So it's not just enough to have the accessible path of travel,
Yeah.
it's to communicate where it is. And that's more than just signage. So it also needs to be up on the city, county, the partnerships, the operations website on how to request a reasonable accommodation, to access that to live, work, or play or engage in that area as appropriate. Play is a little bit harder to say because they can actually restrict who can be there if they don't have official business, work, or are trying to get to their destination, like where they live.
Okay.
So I've seen some traffic about it. I would be happy to forward you that information, but I think that the recommendation that I'd like to see come out of Macabod to the organization that's communicating this is that the location of the accessible path of travel needs to be documented and communicated to the public. Not just public on site with signage, but where you're posting status updates about the site, which would include the city's website. We can't mandate that the county or again, the operation do that, but we can strongly encourage it. And the individual who's intending to sue may require it, but that's not our role. Our role is to look at mitigating the risk towards the city and promoting accessibility and inclusion in the city. So I think that encompasses that, and I'll end there. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Mandy. I think that I'm. I would like to say that should be a very easy task to do, and and communicating that. I keep in mind that I do have to work with several other partners, but I will take that back, and I will do my best.
And Nick, I know I speak for all of us. We know none of this is easy, right? So we really appreciate you being the messenger for the important concepts that are brought up here. But we totally understand, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but we
No,
understand.
it's yeah,
Yeah.
it's I completely understand. I'm just to be very fair. I'm not
Yeah.
taking if when y'all bring this to me, I'm not taking offense or anything like that. So
Okay, all right.
so I welcome it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all right, good. All right. Anything else? I think that's all on our agenda, right?
Yes.
So, last call from anybody? Anybody have anything they want to share?
Hi, this is Harvey here. Just so you're aware that this month of March is Deaf Awareness Month.
Oh,
This is Mandy. Maybe that's something that could be shared with, again, the vaccine coordination team to see if
Yeah.
there's different ways that they could honor different months right now, for example, in March and April that represent, populations in our community as a way to do some outreach for vaccinations.
I love that idea, Mandy. That's a great way to just tie into what's going on in the world. There's also, just for your information, now I understand why, but I signed up to be a part of, during the month, an ongoing, I think it's every Tuesday morning, there is an hour-long program being offered by St. Cloud State in their one of their disability programs, and they bring in a presenter each week. And they've been, so the last 2 weeks, they've been speaking about issues within the deaf community. One of them I attended was related to vocational rehabilitation, but now I understand why they happen all this month, and they all have a topic focus of interest in the deaf community. So I'll just share that. So if any of you are interested, I'm sure you could look up St. Cloud State Disability Services, and you should be able to find a link to that. If not, let me know, send me an email, and I can forward you a contact.
Harvey said he will look into it.
Okay.
This is Mandy. That Twitter link that's on the one pager, I couldn't get it to work.
Sorry, which Twitter link? There's 2 Twitter accounts on that.
Oh, sorry. The Operation Safety Net one.
Let me take a look. If
So,
not,
I mean, it doesn't need to be addressed now, but like
Yeah.
I would say if you could just reply via email or something.
sure. It's opening up for me.
Is it? Okay, I'll try again.
Yeah. But I'll send you the direct link. That's super easy.
As
Okay,
always, Nick, I want to say, thank you. And it sounds like we've got a lot of agenda items moving forward into April. It's always exciting to see that we've got work and constructive work. Is there anything else that is happening in April, like potential presenters or speakers, topics?
So
Yes.
I
Oh,
do
go
want
ahead,
to, and maybe this, we can have a parking lot kind of to make sure that we don't lose the topics that we've discussed that we want to have more content about. But I want to make sure that we get Harvey's suggestion from last month about rebuilding some of the
The ADA building for
Yes. That
Yeah.
one has been a little bit harder to get to, but I still have that on board or there. And then
I-
just as a preview, there is
I'll
there
have a
is
meeting
some
with a construction person, Harvey's saying,
sure.
or
There's okay. There's also Public Works. This committee has put a lot of effort into the Hennepin Avenue reconstruction. So I think Public Works wanted to come back with questions around, oh, I can't quite remember, but I know it's with the curb ramps and street crossings. That's a little aloof, but I can't remember off the top of my mind. They were not available this month, but they will be available in April.
Okay. I just hope, I mean, if we have a parking lot that you can just stick that stuff in so we don't lose it. I just, you know, especially as we seem to be getting more busy and having more impact on things, I don't want to lose track of some of the things that are really important too.
Yep.
All right. What last chance? Anybody? Well, I want to. Was that a
everybody
question?
stay safe. Harvey said,
Yeah.
everybody stay safe.
Okay. And happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. Have a Guinness. All right.
Ken, this is Mandy. Would you entertain a motion to adjourn?
I would.
So I'll move that motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? No second?
You guys want to stay?
Javier, I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. If there are no objections, we can, I'll approve it by consensus. Any objections? We are officially adjourned. Thank you, everybody, very much. Good meeting today.